Human groups are made of human systems. This show stands at the practical intersection of counterintelligence, trauma psychology, and systems thinking. My research focuses on how people, groups, and institutions lose the ability to see reality clearly, and what happens when decisions keep getting made anyway. I'm Kip Perez, and this has changed the game. Welcome back to Change the Game. For a second there, I forgot what the name of my podcast was, so that's how today's going to go. Endurance without orientation just prolongs failure. It keeps people moving after they've lost contact with reality. You see it in organizations, in movements, in churches, in families, and especially in people who pride themselves on this idea of being tough. They confuse stress tolerance with stability, or looking disciplined with actually being disciplined. But real resilience deals with how fast reality can correct you and whether you adapt without lying to yourself about it. It sounds like orientation because it is orientation. And that's why constraints matter. Constraint strips away the story, and it doesn't care about your identity, problems, or your intentions, or your self-image. It does give you immediate feedback, and it does it without malice or mercy. It doesn't care. So you either adapt or you fail. That's true across all domains, whether you're a leader or a member, a boss or an employee, and even whether you're married or single. It really doesn't matter. My guest today, Kyle Shepard, works in environments where failure is visible and feedback is unavoidable, and you can't fake your competence for very long. He's a functional fitness expert, and we'll get into why that's special. He's a military resilience instructor, I can talk too today, and he's a deep thinker. He trains bodies, yes, but more importantly, he exposes orientation under pressure and shows you how to build it intentionally at one real functional movement at a time. So first off, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I want to jump right into the deep end, if that's cool with you.
Always.
So what actually happens to people, both psychologically and behaviorally, if they never actually experience real constraint?
If you never experience constraint, or let's just call it adversity, where you try to avoid hardship, then you inevitably experience more constraints, more hardship. And I've seen that and experienced it myself at different phases of life where, I mean, we evolved to try and seek comfort, seek asylum, seek the ability to nourish ourselves and take care of our tribe. And so that's kind of an evolutionary need that we have to take care of ourselves and be safe, if you will. And as civilization came and as we evolved, we've been able to create environments that allow for a lot of the basic needs we used to strive after to be basically served to us that we can get now through our phones. So we live in a time where the constraints are almost no longer there perceptually. However, you look at any data on rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and all the other DSM-5 text revised criteria, and you realize that this abundance and this prevalence of comfort actually creates more constraints on the mind, body, and soul because of our inability to orient in this now complex domain where our base level needs are met. So how do we get back to having a mission that we see the return on investment when it comes to, rather than acquiring food for my family? If that is as easy as a press of a button, how can I pursue other forms of struggle to realize my ability to overcome adversity rather than just avoid it in the first place? A deep, deep question that you ask. And those constraints is something that is so worthwhile to explore, one that you apply to yourself subconsciously because of wherever you are in life. I love the intro. Like it doesn't matter who you are and what your environment or situation is. We all have them in different ways. They are given to us almost invisibly in our modern times, but the orientation within them provides opportunities for how you can flourish despite them.
So let's talk about, because you're talking about two levels of constraint, right? So say we call the first, I have X constraint that I deal with. And if I don't, if I'm understanding you right, if I don't orient to that, if I don't accept the reality that is, or if I try to dodge said constraint, I create secondary constraints now that together will be worse than what I could have just dealt with in the primary side. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, very funny. Just the way you described it reminded me of something my wife and I brought up to my two oldest children earlier. They're homeschooled, and we are going to be. I'm going to a workshop next week, so we're going up to the in-laws, and the plan is to do homeschool there. However, my son wants to do some of his lessons now and get ahead of it, so he doesn't have to do as much school and have fun with his grandparents at one of their favorite places in the world. My daughter didn't really want to. And so we're like, that's your choice. If you're deciding to do school next week, no problem. And then I said one of my favorite quotes, which is, hey, pursue easier now, experience harder later. And if you experience a little harder now, you may find it's much easier later. And consequences of our choices. And we always have that controllable in life, our choice. It does take awareness, a lot of deep reflection, because some problems in life, they're obvious and there's always controllables with any problem. It comes back to kind of you, yes, your orientation, your intentions, but definitely your subsequent action afterwards. It doesn't matter how you're observing, how you're orienting. If it's not followed by intentional action in relation to your assessment of the problem, it doesn't mean anything. But that power of choice after you determine the visible problems. And then if you have deep reflection, some of the uninvisible issues that are providing constraints, whether it's this cell phone device with all the incoming work, Substack, or other notifications that you like to stay on top of, that is a demand signal that takes you away from whatever you're trying to address in the moment. So there's many obvious things that we ruminate on, problems in our life, where our stress goes. It just shows what we care about. But also, what other weights are we carrying, sometimes literally and figuratively, that are holding down our ability to actually get after in the way that we want to. So that deep reflection is one of my favorite things to come back to, so we can determine course of action that's going to be most effective now.
What do you think constraint exposes that people are trying to dodge or hide from?
What does it expose? I think it exposed the simple answer is opportunity, but it might expose what deep, honest, and sometimes brutal self-reflection can do before you even address constraints. And that is your sure your strengths. So we tend to have no problem doing hard things where our strengths lie. And so another conversation with my daughter, she's really good at doing things that she likes, no matter how hard she has to work, and what the problems may come up. Because she's passionate about it, she gets after it well. But doing things that she doesn't like so well, that's when the attitude can fall. When things get hard in the domains that she's not particularly fond of, whether that's school, whether that's chores, or that's other activities. So yes, our strengths applied, but our weaknesses or our fears, some of our things that we avoid in life. Constraints can really show you the opportunities for areas of work that you can build yourself. And one of my favorite things to do is, I write about with intentional stress challenges, is you can make those areas of opportunity very manageable. You can make them like that barrier to entry. It doesn't mean you have to make your weakness a strength tomorrow, but progressive improvement comes from, this is what it is. If I can't avoid it, or if it matters to me and something that I have to get done in some way, shape, or form, what manageable step can I take right now to begin tackling the problem? What small win can I develop? And no matter if that's the physical domain that I write about quite a bit, but I like the mental, spiritual, and of course, social domain too. Every aspect of our life, you can apply that concept to. The concept bridges all domains, but how you specifically apply it, you have to reorient, develop new strategies, new skills, but apply the same mindset of this constraint, this perception that I have, whether I knew I had it or not in the first place, but now that I'm becoming consciously aware of the opportunity, how can I make this an opportunity? I think constraints provide opportunities if we are willing to be honest with ourselves.
I've been singing your praises on just about every podcast when I talk to people. Just the twofold thing that you do on your Substack every single morning. One being, this reflection, and some of the discussions that we end up having in there are so good. Like I think about them the whole rest of the day. And so I love that you talk about these things because they're not things people ask. And it also speaks to your willingness and even desire to invest in people, as opposed to, okay, you're all here to watch me talk, so now I'm going to talk at you more. And so that's gotten me thinking about, well, how can I incorporate that? Like, is there a place to incorporate that? How would I do it? And all of that. But secondly, speaking about the physicality, your monthly fitness challenge isn't, hey, we're all going to do the Murph today. It's not that. And I think people like me who really are limited physically from some of that stuff, it turns us off to this concept of fitness, right? And so what you've done is you've made it accessible for literally everyone. If you are 900 pounds, guess what? You can still move your neck. And that builds, it starts that habit where you start going, hey, I can do that. What else can I do? And that's almost, to bring in Sam if you want, what then? What's next? And so I want to kind of use that to segue into talk to me about what functional fitness is. Why does that make you different than a gym bro?
Thank you for all of that. Your contributions to that worthwhile reflection in the thread. It's I learn something new every day, and I did used to like kind of answer my own questions, but then I found like it would maybe influence conversation or genuine aspects of it, and so I tend to do that more in notes in other places, and then just chime in later because I am there purely out of curiosity. These are questions that I've asked myself for a long time in different ways, and when I do that quote reflection in the morning before I ask the question, sometimes that influences the subsequent question that I ask, and it's just my favorite way to start the day. It gets my brain chiming. I have my own, at least a few sentences right up around a quote, and then the question just then leads into the rest of the day. And I have amazingly deep thinkers like you that just continue to expand my perspective and make me better. So it's a selfish pursuit, but selflessly, I love that other people get behind it because I couldn't agree with you more, as you saw me say in some of the threads lately. Just some of the most powerful conversations that I've been a part of when people are sharing and giving their perspectives, and we don't always agree. And that's the beauty of life. If we're always agreeing with each other, we're not going to be growing. We're just enabling each other to stick to these rigid ideologies that we tend to have and stay psychologically safe, which, I like that word and joking around with. No, get uncomfortable psychologically so you can find the gaps in your perspective. And then I apply that concept to fitness as well. So I mean, I think most gym bros out there intend to do well, but everybody has their lane. So some people focus on elite fitness athletes or one domain within fitness because there's so many different adaptations that you can coach, whether it's strength, stamina, endurance, mobility, certain skills or hybrids in different ways. But when I think functional fitness in the way that you described it, it's exactly what I'm trying to do when I think of any movement I do. And it's funny you say the Murph, because if you were following me last May when the Murph challenge typically happens, my daily challenge was around preparation for the Murph. But when thinking about how do I encourage people to push, squat, and pull, so do the movements along with the endurance and the Murph, I still want to think, how can I make it accessible for literally anyone to move their body in a functional pattern that involves pulling, pushing, and squatting, and making modifications for that. And so I guess that would be one unique way, because I don't necessarily have, I'm not selling this stuff for one, so that makes me quite different. This is purely a passion project that I've been doing in my community for several years. And so a lot of what I do, I just kind of regurgitate onto Substack now. But I've run classes where I've had teammates of mine bring their fathers in. And I had one class where I had an 80-year-old doing the workouts with us, and then someone else brought their child who was 8. And we were all doing the same workout. And this was at a time when I was training to go after a fitness world record in burpees. So we're doing burpees and other forms of workouts, very high intensity interval training. But I had this wide age span and then different abilities in the room, different sizes, some people with not much fitness background, but we were all getting after it in our own way with modifications at our own perceived exertion levels, because we know like comparisons inevitable. We're going to do that, and we try to meet some standard, and we oftentimes try to meet someone else's standard, which causes us to fail and get a little agitated. there's a place for that in competition in certain realms of life. If you look at it from a comparatively, I'm trying to get better. What are they doing so I can maybe apply it to myself standpoint? But the how is always going to be for you. And you have to understand yourself and your abilities. And if you can have the ideas of constraints to apply to yourself for modification. So I start somewhere where I'm confident and I get to a little bit of point of discomfort, not physically unsafe, but a little bit of exertion outside of my comfort zone. That is where growth is going to happen. That's where adaptations are going to happen. I'm not going to get better at anything if I stay comfortable, whether that's physically or the other domains that I've mentioned, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. A little bit of discomfort at a manageable level, and then you recover from that. That is how you grow. Step into the growth zone, recover from it. So I'm always thinking about in my writing and my coaching, how can I do that for any ability, any age, and make it accessible for all?
So you're actually not arguing, here's the standard, you push yourself till you can meet it. But you're also not necessarily saying there is no standard. You're saying the standard is you and what your situation, your primary constraints, because we're trying to stretch the constraints, stretch the box that you're in without creating secondary constraints.
100%. And
Nice.
many times the win is showing up. So just putting yourself on the mat for the workout, putting yourself in the position to start applying yourself for the daily challenge for 5 minutes, 10 minutes most for the ones that I like to do on Substack. It's just getting a rep in. And then when you see where you're at, I love thinking about, again, perceived exertion level. And if your perceived exertion level is anything beyond sitting on the couch, then you're doing more than you would have otherwise. But then you set a foundation. You set your standard for where you are currently. And then you can start, quote unquote, competing against yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to get better every day. We're going to have hard days. We're not going to sleep well. We're going to be injured. We're going to get sick. We're going to have other constraints applied to our life unavoidably. But we have a standard, a foundation that we can build off of. And before you know it, that standard is going to grow when you understand what your floor is and then what your ceiling could be. My goal typically is not let's test our ceiling all the time. I do like stress testing those hard levels, but I'd much rather give people training to raise their floor. So even at your worst, there's something that you can do. And then when you are feeling a little bit better than your worst, which is most days, you can do a little bit more than that. And yeah, exploring that and how to teach that, how to articulate that is something I'm still evolving. I don't know how good I am there, but between in person with people and then writing, that is the intention. How do I make it accessible and actionable for anyone? And then ultimately, how do I teach people to teach themselves, to learn these concepts? Because it doesn't matter. There is no how-to guide for life. What I'm doing is not what anyone else should be doing because I have to do it my unique way for the constraints of my life. But conceptually, a lot of things do apply. So I'm looking for those concepts and then really encouraging people, how do you apply that to yourself individually with the countless modifications, the countless type of exertion levels, and the countless ways that you can go about it.
So do you ever find, because let's be real, you're like you say, you're not putting out this massive, here's this 75 hard style twice a day that you have to do in order to meet my monthly fitness challenge, me. Because you make it so accessible, do you find ever that you have readers that maybe talk to you off to the side and go, bro, I'm doing X and Y and Z. When are you going to bump this up so that it actually works? How do you respond to those? Do you get those messages?
Oh yeah, all the time. So I give modifications for individuals who have never done a rep of a particular movement. So for example, I just had a intentional stress challenge around pistol squats, which is on one leg, you're balancing, you put the other leg out, and then you squat down to the floor with one leg and stand back up. It is definitely an advanced movement when you think about like neurologically what you need to
That
be able to
sounds
do. Little,
ridiculous.
it is kind of ridiculous. And it was challenging for me to learn how to do that movement. I was in great shape, but I didn't have the neuromuscular connection in my legs to be able to complete the movement. My legs were strong enough, but just individually, asymmetrically doing a squat, too challenging for me. So I needed to modify for a while, but as I did it, I got better and now I'm decent at it. But every movement out there, every adaptation, plasticity is possible for anybody their entire life. So wherever you are now, I guarantee you can get better. But if you are at a place of pretty proficient competency for a movement, we can always make it harder. We can always add more stressors and expand the challenge. So I do try to add in advanced modifications for consideration. So an example of the pistol squat, we can add weight. We can just stay on the same leg rather than alternating, see how many reps we can do while maintaining balance. And then there's your record, if you will, and then you try to beat that. So you can do this in a short amount of time. And all these mini challenges that I like, they're to supplement whatever you're doing in your life. I'm not trying to give someone some big, this is the program that you follow to become X, Y, and Z. Like, here is an accessible thing that anyone has access to get a small win in their day. And then when you're consciously applying something that I believe is self-care, doing something a little challenging for yourself to better yourself, you might start looking at other opportunities in your life to figure out where else can I expand my capacity? Where else can I apply this mindset? Whether that's nutrition, whether that's getting better sleep, whether that's quality of relationships, hard conversations, my mindset and attitude at work. Where else can I take things on that maybe are a little bit perceptually hard with a better attitude, and go figure they might be a little bit more, a little easier, a little bit more actionable, and a little more manageable.
I noticed so many things in what you just said that I want to hone in on specifically. First of all, the fact that you mentioned the term self-care, and the way and the context in which you mentioned it tells me that your orientation around that word is so much different than the standard societal definition of what that is. Because if you go on Instagram, for instance, self-care is me just doing some selfish thing. And it doesn't even have to be bad selfish, right? It's just I'm gonna guilty pleasure my way through binge watching Gilmore Girls or something. As opposed to you're saying, hey, self-care is doing something that is good for me, whether I want to do it or not something I want to do. And that's super important, I think, because like you say, having hard conversations, something that my family, which admittedly is small, it's my husband, me, my son, and his wife, and the four of us get together usually once a week or so, and we'll ask each other, hey, what problems are there right now? Are you mad about anything? Is there something we've done? Not from the perspective of, let's have a conflict, but let's have an uncomfortable conversation and get whatever, if there's something out there handled. And 9 times out of 10, there isn't, right? Because we tend to handle those things in the moment. But those questions lead to deep conversations about where are we going in life? Who do we want to be? And it brings such a level of being able to, even now that my son is grown and married and has his own life, I still get to speak into his life, not from an enmeshing standpoint, but from a wisdom standpoint. I'm 23 years older than you are, right? Like, I've done some things, I've seen some things, and I've learned things from him because he has different experiences. And he comes back and says, this is what I've learned. And I'm like, holy balls, that's amazing, right? And so all of that is self-care.
Yes. And experience really is the best educator. And I love your reframe there. Like, obviously, people who are older than us have more experience in life, but you want to hone in on what those experiences are to understand where their perspectives come from. And don't get me wrong, I like pleasurable activities. I like to enjoy myself. My wife and I like to watch stupid shows together, and do things that generally fall into the stereotypical self-care industry. Treat yourself, as they say on
For sure.
Parks and Recreation. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I just believe balance to all things. And even that word sometimes I have a hard time with. I'm an audiologist primarily in the military. That's my professional background. So I have a doctorate in speech and hearing. I'm sorry, in hearing and balance. My wife is a speech pathologist. And so I like to think of physical balance and how complex it is with all the different systems that are managed by the brain. And sure, I'm standing here right now on 2 feet statically maintaining balance, but most of life is dynamic. Most things are coming at us in different ways, and how we maintain that over time requires a lot of systems working together. And so balance when it comes to self-care or quality of life or all these other things that are hot topics right now, yeah, pleasure is great, but make sure you earn that. Make sure like you're doing it consciously and not just doing what you have to do with work or grinding through the day if things are hard in the home or whatever it may be, and then just plopping down, turning off, and either scrolling or streaming and just living passively. I like to talk about the concepts of pleasure versus fulfillment when I have conversations similar to what we are right now. Pleasurable activities are great, and there's nothing wrong with them. They can feel really good, particularly when you do them with people you care about, or again, have intention behind why you're doing them when you are truly trying to physically rest and maybe psychologically stimulate yourself in some way, because the internet is amazing and there are some really cool shows out there that you can learn from. But man, fulfilling activities, I don't think I'll be laying on my deathbed one day and like be thankful for how many times I watched a certain show or how many likes I got on a certain note. Now, all these things, they're fine, but fulfilling activities are typically challenging, and then we overcome them. When you think back on your best memories in your life, whether it's with others or yourself, it's going to be about challenges that you overcame, and we can create our own challenges. And I believe that is the best kind of self care, giving yourself an actual win by knowing your constraints, knowing your standard, and whether you meet that standard based on why you set it in the first place or not, just testing yourself in some manageable way. I use these words all the time very specifically because we all can do it, even if you're paralyzed. And I talked to a guy named Marcus Aurelius Anderson, who was paralyzed from the neck down and died twice on the surgical table. And he's in bed. And of course, he went through some dark periods in that time. But when he got to this mindset of what manageable thing can I do right now, and focusing on just trying to move my finger, he's laying in the bed and he's still looking for opportunities to challenge himself. And then before you know it, months and months pass and he's starting to learn to walk again, starting to do stairs. And he's applying this after being told he'd never walk again. How can I do the next hard thing to potentially expand my capacity and what I can control? So anyone, if you're alive, there's something that you can do in a domain of opportunity, whether it's physically or anywhere else, to challenge yourself. And no matter what standard you meet or not, the effort is the reward. And then you do it long enough, pretty incredible things can happen. And then you look back a year or two later, and now you're doing things for your warm up that you would have thought were impossible a few years ago. Because again, plasticity is possible for all if we put in enough intention, effort, and consistency.
Do you think that, or do you find in your resilience work or in your fitness work that the more skilled someone is, sometimes the harder they are to correct or the less they want to take correction?
In that domain, for sure.
Where
Because
does that come
unlearning
from?
unlearning is far more difficult than learning. So like to empty your cup, and this is I experienced this in jujitsu quite a bit with myself, people I coach, and just in general. But when you create a subconscious habit and you just muscle memory do something, to reverse that is going to take time rather than completely being a beginner where you are going to suck for a while. But if you are learning the correct way and you become consciously competent eventually because you're doing it the correct way over a while, now you have something you can lean on as you develop that subconscious competence over time where you correctly do the right thing subconsciously, where your reaction is a response that you would want to have. But when your reactions to incoming stressors, incoming adversity is less than ideal, it is very hard to course correct that, but it is something that we can do. I know it's something I work on as a parent all the time and how I respond, or sometimes, unfortunately, react to my kids when they're having a hard day. But catching myself, repairing it when I do it wrong, but really trying to set intentions as I come home from work or before a certain day or certain environments that I know are going to be challenging. Set up that mindset, set that intention, but man, try to make sure those actions follow as consciously as I can so I can create those habits that I can lean on over time. But habit creation takes a long time, which is why I usually use the word skills and have these monthly challenges, because in 30 days, we can become pretty proficient in a certain movement, in a certain pattern with daily attempts, even just 5 minutes at doing that and building upon our foundation. But yeah, it's easier said than done, but all great things are.
That is a true statement. So you mentioned parenting. Let's use that as a springboard because parenting is leadership. Well, theoretically, at its best, parenting is leadership. It's also manipulation in a positive way, you know. People say all the time that manipulation's bad and it's always got this connotation of negativity. And I don't agree with that. I think manipulation is a neutral act and it's all about intent. And but let's be real. You're constantly manipulating your kids because you're trying to push pull this behavior pattern and instill character and affect who they become. Uh, if you have not built some of the resilience things that you're talking about, if you have not learned to understand what your constraints are so that you can push them, wouldn't that lead to, especially if you have some unmet emotional stuff, unmet emotional needs and whatnot, that would lead to a control and insecurity and things like that. So when somebody comes to you for any kind of coaching, how do you tell? Because I'm sure you do in the first meeting or two. How do you tell when somebody is seeking control over something external as opposed to seeking internal control or building their capacity?
Typically the level of emotion they have around talking about the topic and speaking from experience. And of course, the language they use with that emotion. So for me, I tend to get angry and I look at the emotion of anger as the attempt to control things that are outside of our control. And there's no one in this world I love more than my children, with the exception of my wife. And I, I want to guide these young humans into being independent, flourishing adults. And I also want them to live a happy and fulfilling childhood. So all of this care that I have with them into being the best form of themselves, of course, they're developing brains. They're going to push every boundary. They're going to emotionally react to a lot of things as these brains are developing, and they don't have the capacity to use the prefrontal cortex and learn from mistakes in the same way. So I have these expectations, and I feel like as their father, they should be listening to me. And that word "should," by the way, is a great trigger and a great clue into people, for what other people should be doing. But you said it exactly. So where's the focus? Is it outside of yourself, which is going to be things beyond your control? Yes, communication, is something we can always control. We can influence people with our communication, but I cannot control my children. I mean, I physically can, and I can set boundaries, and I can do fear based, and I can try to apply all these things that now, through a lot of great evidence and a lot of evolved perspectives in the parenting space, we see that punishment, all these things actually don't work. They'll become submissive. They'll passively go through time, and then they hold on to a lot of emotional baggage maybe people our age hold on to from our own childhood. And it's such an interesting realm, because parenting, I agree with you, is leadership, but differently, it's leadership of people that we could not care more about, and therefore we have more emotions around it. To answer your question, it's, does the language apply to themselves or apply to what they should be doing, and more concerned with correcting the behavior rather than how do I function within this environment that I know is going to be challenging. Every parent knows the phases of life and what comes on if you've looked into it in any way, or of course experienced it as it happens in real time. It's chaos, and it's beautiful
Absolutely.
chaos. But at the end of the day, there is no strategy in the world that's going to apply well when it comes to other people if you're not managing yourself. So always coming back to the self, regulation and space before reaction response and all those good concepts. Again, uniquely how you do that. I have all kinds of ideas behind the how, but really you got to figure out, again, to quote our good friend Sam Alimo, what then?
Yeah. I I'm sitting here thinking about the note that I posted on Substack earlier because I had seen that someone had said parenthood requires the IQ of a dog. And it incensed me to read that. And then I was immediately I'm sitting here listening to you talk and describe how much intentionality, how much self-control, how much constant moderating of yourself and the environment to ensure safety, emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual. You are constantly, everything is a balance with parenting, right? You're constantly trying to not give too much, not take too much away, and it's in the moment modulating the environment and modulating yourself with every thought, every action, and constantly being a little bit worried that you might screw it up, that you're going to screw it up. And then I see somebody come along and say, oh, yeah, you just got to be as smart as a dog. Well, first of all, I think dogs are smarter than a lot of people. So there's that. But secondly, we talk about you brought up, punishment and things like that. And I think, as a Gen Xer, our generation, and I don't know if you're a Gen Xer or a millennial, but we laugh about, if you could stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, like all of these sayings that we all grew up with, and just this mentality of punishment versus guidelines and things like that. And we laugh about it. But the older I get, the more I look back and go, ooh, as my son would say, because it's not what we thought it was. And that doesn't mean that I subscribe to this idea of gentle parenting. I think that's also BS. But there's a happy medium. Talk to me about that. And then I want to segue. So don't let us get any further in the weeds on this, but I definitely want to hear your take on this.
I'm curious, the person who wrote the note about the IQ of a dog, like how deep of a thinker they might be and what they truly meant by that. Because while IQ isn't the word I would use, you think about a dog's love of the human beings that they live with, and there might be some wisdom there. So like you think about truly unconditional love. And no matter what you do to your dog, it's going to be hard to break that. Like you may hurt them and that may bother them quite a bit. But like when I think about one of the purest expressions of unconditional love, I tend to see it in dogs and in children. And there's a powerful writer on Substack. Her name is Erin Miller. And so it's called Unpopular Parenting. And she writes on parenting concepts, and very similar to Sam, doesn't give this how-to guide in any way. She gives you raw, deep insights to her story, perspectives, and basically some of the whys or what's behind it without the hows in the parenting realm. And just like Sam, I sit there reading her post, and then my wife and I wrestle with it, talk about it, and think about how it applies to her life. But one thing that she wrote on relatively recently was forgiveness. And like you mess up with your kids, while repair is crucial, and owning that really demonstrates not only to yourself that you're working to change that. As you said out loud, I'm sorry, I misstepped there, I'm going to really work on to change that again. But you also show them that it's okay to make mistakes, and you kind of reestablish that connection. But she mentioned, like, even before you repair with children, they've forgiven you already. Like, they love you unconditionally. You're their father, you're their mother. And so why do we struggle to do the same thing back to them? So if my 4-year-old son, who looks just like me and acts just like me, he's a wild man and no one gets under my skin more than him, why do I hold on to him having a hard day and not listening like I expect him to be different from a 4-year-old whose pattern behavior shows that this is just probable for him? Why do I sit there and keep that fire, that anger inside of me? Like I'm having a hard time forgiving him for being a 4-year-old. And there's probably aspects of my own childhood and the things that you alluded to there, and trying to control things that I can and trying to create this environment that's better. If only he would change and he should be doing this, then things would be so much better. It's so funny to reflect back on that and think about the opportunities. But like you said, to your question, that middle ground, uh, first of all, like most of my perspectives in the parenting space thankfully come from the fact that I am an incredibly lucky man and I have a wife who could not be more passionate about being a mother and taking on homeschool, which she's done now, and just being the best presence in our home that she can be. And she really demonstrates this in her actions, facilitates in our conversations, these exact things of what can we do to continue to work not only individually, but collectively, she and I together, to be that sturdy and steady presence in front of our children where we will mess it up. But how do we own that when it happens, but do our damnedest to stay in the middle of not fear-based over control, and also not passively gentle, let them loose and we just sit there and try to preserve psychological, we always try to preserve physical safety, but allowing them to mess up, allowing them to have opportunities to own their own actions, giving them guidance somewhere in the middle. Again, this is one of those, there is no exact how to, but the intention followed by us being on the same page and the actions for what makes sense for the fact that we have 4 children now, all these activities, same parents, same environment, 4 drastically different children that need different types of conversation, different types of oversight. I don't have a great answer specifically to how we do it, other than, man, just like the intentional stress challenges happening daily, daily work, conversations, and reorientation within each child within our home through the ruts and the phases of life of, okay, how do we operate now in what is happening post holidays, for example, trying to settle back in, being on the road for 2 weeks, then getting sick, coming back home, trying to get back to homeschool, work gets crazy. Life was nuts throughout January. And we were having a hard time. And she actually is going to be producing a post pretty soon about that exact moment. And just some of these simplistic things that we brought up in our conversations of, what can we orient to? What can we focus on controlling now to get us back to some semblance of a steady home, and getting us all back on the right track together? And the conversation is always like, if we talk long enough or rationally enough, it's not what should they be doing better. It's what can we individually and together as a couple focus on ourselves. Yes, it involves schedules. It involves boundaries. It involves us being on the same page. But it's always, what can we do? Me, Kyle, her, Mary Kate, do to course correct. So orienting back to yourself always, that is the true controllable. Whether it's parenting, whether it's work, whether it's fitness, life, there's where you can have the opportunities.
There's so much in what you just said, but I'm forcing myself to move on, and I will make a note of it for the next time you come on. Let's take all of that now and apply it to a business concept where you don't love your employees. You're not somehow emotionally invested in them becoming the best version of themselves. I mean, maybe to some extent, but certainly not to the level of your children. How do you apply these same principles in that environment where you don't run the show as much?
Yeah, and I do like the concept of leadership at any level. So we are encouraging our kids to be leaders at their respective levels, whether it's the oldest sibling, the oldest brother, James, my mini me. He's now an older brother to my daughter Lucy, who's 7 months, and she's not the best listener or talker yet, so I'm not telling her to be a leader too much. But even trying to empower James to take on that responsibility of being a big brother, being a helper, and trying to create these identities within the mission that is our family. So I think there is a lot of overlap in the home to the workplace or anywhere else in life in the realm of leadership. So how do we empower others to think about the respective mission of the organization? So understanding that why, having a clear, concise understanding of what it is that we're trying to accomplish as a team. And then identifying those roles on the team. And if you are failing at the most basic role in an organization, the organization itself is failing. So if the janitors aren't doing a good job cleaning the bathrooms, then maybe infection spreads. Someone gets sick, someone falls because a puddle's not cleaned up, injured, and maybe that individual has another, and just downstream effects of somebody not taking their role seriously and showing up as needed for that mission. So really empowering others to understand their respective whys in alignment with the mission and the fact that we are all leaders. And to your point about a family, um, you think about your extended family, and we all have family members that maybe we don't like so much. I love my family, but there's people in my extended family that maybe I'm not the biggest fan of. And that's going to be true of the workplace too. So I'm not telling you to love everybody you work with. I'm definitely not telling you to like everybody, but you can definitely have respect for everybody, show respect for everybody. Having versus showing are two different things. So maybe you won't have respect for some people, but you can show them respect and you can respect their position on a team. So just changing your orientation of the people you work with rather than competition or they should be doing this. Love the word should, as you know. That's always something that if I hear that, I know that's an opportunity. People I worked with in Guam on a stress management team out there, psychologists would always say, don't quit shoulding all over yourself. So that word should is something, if you hear that, no matter what you're using it for, that's an opportunity for reframing. And yeah, so understanding the mission, setting standards and roles and responsibilities for each person there, that why within it, and then empowering everyone to take accountability for their role in the team, and then the empathy for each person too. So understanding people have different perspectives, different roles. That comparative stuff is usually going to lead to problems, but what can we do as a team to accomplish the mission? I try to start there.
I think you inadvertently mentioned a really important thing. You always hear start with your why and get back to your why. I would argue you have to get back to your what. What is it you're doing? How are you supposed to know why you're doing it if you don't even know what you're doing? And like you say, that goes back to the mission language. And I love that even in your own family, you're saying, hey, we have a mission in our family and everybody has a part to play in it. And all of our parts, whether you're 40 or you're four, it's an important part. And I love that because it's not just teaching your kids that they have intrinsic human value, which I think is, but you're teaching them that their contribution matters and that it has nothing to do with whether they matter. And that separation is such a really important thing too. So if somebody's just coming up to your stuff, and I know most of the people who listen to this are probably already going to be fans of yours, but for the average reader who's like functional fitness, what do you want to tell them? Like, just give me like a brief, what do you want them to know about their lives?
Yeah, I speak a lot to the physical space and different opportunities to challenge yourself. But while it is true that fitness can improve your physical health in the domain, endurance, cardiovascular, metabolic function, strength, of course, still metabolic, and then better strength means less likelihood to fall, longer longevity, more ability to do functional things throughout the lifespan. There's all kinds of great physical benefits to getting after it. But it's all byproducts. It's all secondary to why I like to push it. And that's for building the skill that is resilience. I like fitness because you hear me say the four domains that I talk about quite a bit, the physical space, the mental space, the social space, and the spiritual space. If you want to have the opportunity to train all four of those spaces simultaneously, it has to be something physical. So you can, if you are more of an introvert, you can do fitness challenges with others. And you're doing that right now in a nice, manageable way in a community online where you don't need to be physically with others, but you're holding yourself accountable and you're putting that check mark up for when you get it. You're speaking to those experiences. You're talking about how you are progressing within certain challenges. And that's amazing. You're speaking to those adaptations. Not only is that challenging yourself socially by putting yourself out there, but then you're inspiring others to do it as well because people are quickly knowing your story and the power behind it, which my goodness, kid, we can talk more about that very soon because you are an inspirational individual. But I love the idea that we can challenge ourselves in the social domain. And for me, that you might be able to tell this, I'm an extrovert. I like others. I'm very outgoing. So I like challenging myself to do a lot of things in solitude. So by myself and challenging myself in that way. But when you push yourself in certain ways that make you uncomfortable, you're not only challenging your body, you're challenging your mind and spirit. And you can apply strategies for the mind, like very meditative, if you will, where I'm only focused on my breath when I'm holding a plank for as long as possible. And holding a plank beyond a minute is not really beneficial. There's a lot of good research behind that for your core or your lower back. Like there could be some aspects that are beneficial when it comes to isometric exercise for duration, but again, whether or not it's beneficial, as long as it's not destructive to you and it's causing pain and breaking you down, I like the idea of training the resilience muscle in challenge. And the more you can expand your ability to do hard things, the rest of life starts to feel a little easier. Because when you do hard things on purpose, when inevitably adversity comes your way, you might be able to take that on with a little bit more ability to accomplish what you're trying to do. So it's through the lens of resilience, but I do like the physical domain for that reason.
I have to admit that I did not want to, when I first subscribed to you and I saw that you did this, I saw those questions and I'm like, ooh, that's a really fascinating question. There is no way on God's green earth that I am going to answer it in a room full of strangers, which is, what that amounts to. And now it's one of the best parts of my day because I took that plunge and like you say, you're intentional. This is uncomfortable for me. However, I also recognize that this is a blind spot for me, and I may be missing out on things because I'm not doing it and I'm protecting myself over that. I'm seeking comfort instead of growth. And so when I was telling my husband about it, I heard myself saying, the best part is that it forces vulnerability. And he looks at me with his eyebrows raised, like, wow, look at you, But that's the beauty of it. So, Thank you for doing that, for bringing that to the space. I think it's fantastic. How can people find you so that they can get in on all these fantastic conversations?
Substack is titled Resilient Mental State. That's anything else I do anywhere else. It's just copy and paste from that. I'm really not on social media. It's a lot of post and ghost there, but just kind of ways to put some of the quote reflections out there, if you will, or some of the amazing podcasts and people I get to talk to. But that's really the only social media. So if Substack is social media, it doesn't quite feel like it because, man, the depth of conversations and the thinkers and extraordinary individuals that I get to meet, like yourself, just through curiosity. It's just such an amazing space when we think about the digital realm and all the limitations and potential ramifications that the algorithms of social media has. I'm not experiencing that with social Substack. I'm also pretty intentional about when I use it at different points of the day to check on certain aspects. So I'm not always on top of it. A lot of it happens in the morning. And then I have a few notes throughout the day that I remind myself, like, hey, push this out. And a lot of those are done when I'm getting after it, either sitting in a sauna or on the assault bike at a low intensity level for a long time. And the idea started pumping. It's Resilient Mental State on Substack. And then I do a podcast with the same name.
Sweet, sweet. This is awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and yapping with me.
Yeah, incredible. Love talking to you both online and here. And I look forward to having you on my own podcast sometime soon.
As we wrap up this conversation with Kyle Shepard, I'm struck by how profoundly the physical and the mental are connected. We talk a lot on the show about orientation and how clearly we see reality and how that shapes every decision we make. Kyle made a compelling case that one of the fastest and most reliable ways to improve that orientation is through functional fitness and deliberate physical discipline. It's easy to treat the body as separate from the mind, but Kyle reminds us that when you train your body with purpose, you're also training your mind to face discomfort and delay gratification, staying grounded in what's actually true, rather than what feels convenient. That embodied discipline becomes a daily practice in reorienting yourself to reality. In a world that's full of distractions and comfort seeking and systems that actually reward weakness, functional fitness isn't just about looking better. It's actually a form of counterintelligence against your own excuses. It's trauma psychology in motion, teaching your nervous system that you can handle stress and come out okay, maybe even stronger. It's systems thinking applied to the most important system that you control, your own mind. If you've been listening and feeling that pull toward more clarity and discipline, start where Kyle suggested. Move with intention. Build habits that force you to confront reality instead of escaping it. The mind follows the body more often than we like to admit. Thanks for listening. This has been Change the Game.